Welcome to the third and final day of the conference. We have a late start to the day today. It's a quintessential Lahori morning, I guess. We get started around noon. So, but it's going to be all substance from here. We're going to be talking about taxation and fiscal responsibility. We have a session with some very interesting paper titles and discussing whether we need democracy. And do women matter, which unfortunately, even in 2024, is a question we still need answered. But without further ado, I'm very excited about this second plenary session, which is by Professor Mazhar Waseem. Professor Waseem is a associate professor of economics at the University of Manchester. He's done some significant work in how we think about taxation, incentives, and behavior of taxpayers in not just the Pakistani fiscal landscape, but in a lot of other areas or contexts where compliance is very low. His talk today is going to talk about non-filing dilemma, which I believe is a persistent and challenging issue, not just in Pakistan, but in many developing countries. So please join me in welcoming Professor Waseem, and we can get started whenever you're ready.
So thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful conference. Very happy to be here first time in person. So I wanted to talk about something else about Pakistan's tax system. But then I realized all the good tax jokes in Pakistan are non-filing jokes. So then I said maybe we should talk something about non-filing. So this year, Pakistan received more than 5.3 million income tax returns. So this is a phenomenal 8 times increase from the level seen in 2007. And this remarkable growth was achieved through a series of very intrusive and very costly measures introduced by the government to punish non-filing. For example, non-filers, they were subject to higher withholding taxes, and they were like outrightly banned from engaging in certain high value like economic transactions. But, and you could sense there was a but after that sentence. So despite this phenomenal growth in tax filing, so there has been no growth in tax revenue. In fact, as a share of GDP, we are collecting less revenue today than we did in 2007. And it is true if we look at total taxes collected by FBR or if we look at income tax collected by FBR. And more than 2/3 of our tax filers, so they are junk filers. So junk filer means a person files a tax return, but they report no taxable activity. But the government is not done yet. So we are on this escalatory ramp where increasingly harsh measures are planned against non-filing. For example, so there are proposals that their SIM cards would be blocked. So they will be not allowed to open bank accounts. They will not be allowed to travel abroad. And so this creates a filing obsession puzzle. And the puzzle is this. So more than 2/3 of our existing tax filers are junk filers. And 8 times more filing has not resulted in more revenue from us. Yet we are introducing increasingly intrusive and increasingly costly measures to bring even more of these unproductive tax filers into the system. So then the question is why? And from this reference, so you would have realized that this puzzle is not unique to Pakistan. So this exists so this obsession with registration, with expanding the tax base, exists in other countries as well. So in other developing countries as well. So this is known as registration obsession puzzle. But in our case, so emphasis is more on filing than registration. So I'm calling it filing obsession puzzle. So the purpose of today's talk is to like make sense of this puzzle. And if we have like time at the end, so then we will also talk about why Pakistan struggles to raise more revenue. Okay, so who's a non-filer? So non-filer is someone who should have filed a tax return but has not. So what does the revenue authority do to like combat non-filing? So they can ask the non-filer to file a tax return, and they can impose penalty and fine for that infraction of law. And even then, if non-filer does not respond, so they can issue what is called a best judgment assessment. So they can assess the tax and they can proceed to recover the amount of tax not paid. So this is the standard way to treat non-filing in almost all revenue authorities. And it used to be the case for Pakistan before 2013-2014 tax year. So in 2013-14, so we decided that non-filers are special and they need like special attention by the revenue authority. And we developed a host of measures to like target only non-filing. Okay. So they are, as I said, are subject to higher withholding tax rates, so they cannot engage in some transactions and so on. So what does economic theory tells us about the optimal size of the tax net? If the government makes a person who's a non-filer file a return, so there are going to be some benefits and there are going to be some costs. So benefits are that the new filer, so they may give government more revenue. So government may get more revenue from that additional filer. So on top of that, so there could be like non-tax benefits, and non-tax benefits are, so if you formalize a firm which was informal, so there is some evidence that they grow at a higher rate. Or alternatively, if perceptions about equity and fairness of the tax system improve, because now there is a wider tax base, so voluntary compliance may increase. So people may voluntarily pay up more, and this is like indirect effect of increased filing. So against these benefits, so there are costs. So first thing is, so the filer, they have to like spend money and effort to file a tax return. So it means there would be compliance costs. And if you're using very costly punitive measures, tax and non-tax measures to force them to file, so then there will be excess burden associated with those measures, with those taxes. So some economic activity will be hard, and then government will spend money and effort to collect one more, to process one more return. So those are administrative costs. So administrative costs, so they are weighted heavily than compliance costs because they are financed through distortionary taxes. So then the optimal rule is you make a non-filer a filer, or you bring one more person to the tax net if the social value of the benefits that will accrue out of that exceeds the social value of the costs. So this is a very, very simple rule. So not all non-filers are tax non-compliant. So this is very, very important. So this 2x2 table is important. So along the rows, we are whether a person is a tax filer or not. Okay. And along the columns, we have whether a person is tax compliant or not. So people who have not filed a tax return, so some of them are non-compliant. So they should have filed a tax return and they have not. But some of them are not non-compliant because they were not required under the law to file a return. Okay. Similarly, people who file a return, some of them are not tax compliant because they are tax evaders and avoiders. And some of them are like compliance taxpayers. They file a tax return, they report their income honestly. So they are all the lumps, professor, the good people. Okay. So who are these like compliant non-filers? So who are people in this cell? So the law says if your income, annual income is below like 600,000 rupees, so you are not required to file a return. Okay. And according to like latest household income survey in Pakistan, so these are between 90 and 95% of working adults in Pakistan. So they are legally exempt from filing a tax return. So then even if your income is like above 600K, if it is from a source which is not taxable, so then even then, if your income is above 600K, you are not required to file a tax return. So we received between 25 and 30 billion dollars of remittances each year, nearly 10% of our GDP. So then there are a lot of people living even very affluent life in Pakistan who are not required to be filers. Okay. So I think by now you would have realized first key problem with our war on non-filing. So our war on non-filing is not targeted. So we should target only people who are non-compliant non-filers. Instead, we are targeting everyone. Instead, our costly measures to punish non-filing, they affect everyone. And the second thing is people in this cell. So there are many, many times more than these people. So then as a result, so there is like lot of unnecessary pain and suffering caused by these measures. And there is a lot of loss of economic activity because we are preventing these people to engage in certain transactions. Okay. So what are the costs that we are imposing on everyone? So what are the costs that we are imposing everyone here? So the first one is we are making them pay tax on certain transactions, which we are calling withholding taxes at a higher rate. So in general, so the withholding tax rates on non-filers are 2 times on filers, but in some cases, so they are 20 times higher. So this is a sample of some of those withholding tax rates. So the full document that contains all the withholding taxes, that document is 39 pages long. So I have selected only like some withholding taxes here. All these taxes are ugly, but some of them are unimaginably bad. So I have highlighted only 2. So this profit on debt is the interest people get on their savings. So if you are non-filer, you pay 35% tax on the interest you get from your savings account. So this is a bad tax for at least 2 reasons. So savings account are one of the least risky assets in which one can invest their money in. So then these are usually the least wealthy people who have savings accounts. So these are the pensioners, housewives, so on. So you are taking 35%, you are forcing, and most of them are not required to be filers. I have already told you they are not legally required to file a tax return. But we are saying that either you file a return or you pay 35% tax on your savings, on your return on your saving. Okay. And the second reason it's a bad tax is like, seriously, do you want to tax savings at the rate of 35%? For like a host of behavioral reasons, people do not invest and people do not save enough. And as a result, savings are effectively either not taxed or they're subsidized in most economies. In the UK, so you can save £4,000 every year in your lifetime saving account, and government tops up your savings by 25%. You save 100, you get 25 from the government. So here we are like taking 35% out of savings. So this is a tax on cash withdrawal from banks. So effectively, this is a tax on bank use. And I'm going to show you that Pakistan is one of the worst country in terms of access to formal banking channels. And we are discouraging people even further to use like formal banking channels. So the second set of like policies to punish non-filing is they are trying to restrict consumption and investment options of non-filers. And here lies the second key problem with our like war on non-filing. So filing unit is individual. It's an individual who has to file a tax return. But consumption takes place at the household level. So you see the mismatch. So take an example. So there are 7 people in a household, 2 husband and wife, 2 partners are working. So they should file a tax return and assume that they do. But there are like 5 other people living in the household, 2 elderly parents, 3 young children. So the consumption is by the household collectively. So if you ban some of the consumption of like non-filers, so then you're punishing the whole household, not the people who are non-filers. Okay. So if, for example, the elderly parents, they want to travel to meet like some other kid in Germany, so they cannot. They have to become a filer before do that. If the son wants to go to like a university to have a degree, so they have to like either file a return. So they have realized that there is a mismatch. And the fixes that they are trying to do is even more Orwellian. So now they're thinking about having family cards. So where people will have a card of family. And each family, so they will get an allowance. So that allowance will depend on how much like income you have reported on your tax return. And the family will not be like allowed to consume or invest more than what is there written in your like family card, family allowance card. Okay. So I have like tried to like convince you that these are like extremely costly measures and they're not targeted. So as a result, so there is like a lot of suffering and pain and loss of economic activity. So are these measures working? So now let's look at, so are they achieving the purpose for which supposedly they have been deployed? So working here means that the social value of benefits exceeds the social value of costs. So what we have here is like this shows the number of tax filers in Pakistan. So I have normalized this number to 1 in 2007. So then this shows growth. So we had like nearly 3 times more tax filers in 2020 so than in 2007. But if you extend this series to like 2 more recent years, so then this is 8 times. So we now have more than 8 times tax filers than in 2007. So then here I look at revenue. So this is total taxes collected by FBR as a share of GDP. Again, so this is normalized at 1 here. So we are collecting less revenue now so than we did in 2007. So you see there was no growth in tax filing up to 2013, 2014 when we introduced these measures. When we introduced these measures, filing started increasing, but not revenue. Okay. So this is income tax revenue. So last was total tax revenue. And you can see income tax revenue is like even lower than we had in 2007. So now you can say that so revenue is not the only thing we are after. So there could be non-revenue benefits of more filing. So for example, so these firms, so they have now formalized, so they might be growing at a faster rate. But remember, so if firms are growing at a faster rate, so they will be paying more taxes. So they will be remitting more taxes. So then there should be an effect here as well. So that's an indirect benefit of more filing, but we do not see anything here. And also if like More filing means perceptions about fairness, equity, all these soft motivations to pay tax. So they improve. So then we should get more revenue, and that should be reflected here. And we do not see anything. So there are no direct or indirect benefits of this increased filing that we have witnessed in last 10 years. So then another thing that you can say is maybe so we need to be patient and there will be some benefits in the long run. But like 10 years is like fairly long run for me, and we have not seen anything in 10 years. So then it's like it doesn't look likely that there will be any like direct or indirect benefit of this additional filing. Okay. So then the next question is, why is there like no effect on revenue when we have like 8 times more filers? So the first reason is junk filers. So most of our existing filers, so they are junk filers. So they report, so they file a tax return but report no business activity. Okay. And this number, so these red bars, so these are increasing now. So as I said, so now nearly 70% of our tax filers are junk filers. They do not report any activity, they do not pay any income tax. So the second reason is new filers, so they are always likely to be smaller than existing filers. All the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos of Pakistan, so they are already tax filers. So the new filers that you are going to find out, so they are likely to be smaller and they are going to likely to pay less. And you can see that in most years, the contribution of new taxpayers is trivial. So then the third thing is that income tax is always a top heavy phenomenon. So most of the tax is collected from the top few percent of taxpayers. So this is Pakistan. So this green curve is tax, the share of income tax paid by the top 10% taxpayers. And you can see that the top 10% taxpayers, virtually they pay 100% of the tax we collect. So then we can make a stronger statement than just saying that 70% of our tax filers are junk filers. So we can say that 90% of tax filers, so their contribution to tax revenue is trivial, is negligible. So this is another way of like looking at this. So if you look at the distribution of like tax filers, you are looking only at tax filers. So the person at the 75th percentile, so they pay around 10 to 12,000 rupees a month, trivial amount. So only it's the top 10% which contribute significantly. Okay. So are we like unique that the new filers do not bring more revenue? Is Pakistan's experience unique? So the answer is no. So large scale registration drives, so they do not produce significant more revenue. So this is the experience of more countries. And those of you who are old enough like me, so we remember that we also tried in 2000, in the year 2000, to like broaden our tax base. So we ran a survey. So where every household in Pakistan, the idea was that we will get information from every household in Pakistan and we will document the national economy using the results of that survey. So that was a massively costly exercise. Army was involved. So they distributed the forms and collected and then processed the data. Nothing came out of it. So this our war on non-filing is our second stab at using brute force to expand the tax base. And there is large evidence that these efforts they do not work. Work again in the sense that they do not produce much revenue. Okay, so then we come back to puzzle. So this puzzle stands there. So most of our existing tax filers, so they are junk filers. even when we increase number of filers by 8 times, we do not get more revenue. So then the question is why we are engaging in this very costly exercise to bring these unproductive taxpayers into our tax system. So the literature, so they have offered like 3 explanations. So one is, so this makes a very compelling political narrative. So if a government says that we are going to expand the tax base and we are not going to burden the existing taxpayers, so the governments in developing countries need more revenue. So they need to do something. So if the government says the following, that we are to get additional revenue, we are going to broaden the tax base and we are not going to burden existing taxpayers, it will be very comforting for the incumbent taxpayers who are more likely to be elites and have like more power in the system. So this is like the political economy kind of explanation. So this also like divert attention from failure to like tax elites and large enterprises. So if you are reading reports now, so large scale massive evasion is being found against like all our big industries, tobacco, tobacco, sugar, cement. And this tax evasion is not of like the garden variety, so where you use like clever accounting to avoid tax. So this is hardcore tax fraud type of evasion, so where they're using like fraudulent fake sales tax invoices to claim like illegal input tax adjustments or refund. So if you keep talking about like not, if you keep focus on non-filers, it takes attention away from where the real tax evasion is and where the real money you can get by combating on tax evasion is. So this also like works for the revenue authority. So more the tax filers are, more the opportunities to extract bribes. So then they are also very happy. So in fact, in this country, the whole industry is developing. So this industry of tax filers, tax consultants, tax preparers, who are saying people, let's file a tax return. It's very easy rather than like not doing anything else. So is there something that we can do instead? So there are like better options available. So one is, of course, when a country develops, so there is movement from informal to formal sectors. And this is because productivity of operating in the formal sector goes up. Firms voluntarily move to formal sector. So I'm comparing here Vietnam with Pakistan. And what I'm showing you is the informal employment. And this is data from International Labour Organization. So Vietnam has been growing for like many years, and there comes a point, so when they turn the corner and informal employment there starts decreasing. So if we look at us, so for us, informal employment is still growing. So despite all these like crackdown on non-filing, informal employment is growing. So this says that if we fix our macroeconomics and if we let the country grow at a decent rate for like a decent period of time, so then we will hit something like this, where firms will start moving into the formal sector voluntarily. You won't have to do anything. But if you are not that patient and you want to do something like immediately, so then you can do targeted enforcement. So targeted enforcement is you have to like focus on the cell. So where the person is non-filer, but they should be a filer. So FBR is sitting on like tons of data. So they can identify taxpayers who should be in the tax net, but they are not. And what they can do is they can identify these taxpayers and they can send them like pre-filled tax returns, as it happens in like many countries. And the taxpayer will have the option to basically amend, edit, or modify the return that they received from FBR, and they will file it. Okay. So this is one way of doing this. Another way, in the extreme case, even then, if you're not happy and you want to have like more filers, so then what you can do is make every self-employed person in the economy file a tax return. So tax evasion is usually more at the self-employment level. So employees, so they don't evade taxes. So there you can like lower the requirement to file tax return. Okay. So what would be the benefit of doing this? So the benefit will be you will have like more filers. These filers would be who will ultimately become taxpayers on some day because they are business owners. So they are not housewives, they are not overseas Pakistanis, so they are not pensioners who are never going to like become taxpayers. So you are focusing on the portion of the population which should be in the tax net, but they are not because they are misreporting their income or because they are too small now. But this will be much better than doing what we are doing now. Okay. So I have like 10 minutes more, so in which I will give you like very like helicopter view of why Pakistan cannot like collect more revenue. So there are like three types of explanations. So one is like weak state capacity. So this is like our governance using different metrics from world governance indicators. So the quality of our governance, our judicial institutions is very low. So we are at the bottom of the league and there has been no progress in last 30, almost 30 years. So this is like entire generation wasted in which there has been no progress in terms of governance. So why is this important? So this is important because FBR has to enforce their tax demands through the existing judicial system of the country. If judicial institutions of the country are so weak, so they cannot enforce their demands. Okay, so ultimately whatever their audits are, whatever their cases against tax evasion will fail if these judicial institutions do not improve. Second thing is, so this idea that there is no taxation without information. So you can tax only what you observe. Alternative way of saying this is if all transactions in the economy are cash transactions, so then no revenue authority, however sophisticated they are, can collect revenue. So this is the proportion of population who owns a debit or credit card. So we are doing worse than low income countries. And again, we are not bridging the gap between us and low income countries. So red is us. So blue is average of low income countries. So in terms of like access to formal banking channel, so we are one of the worst countries in the world. And some of the policies that we are using, so they are making it even worse because we are saying that you will not be allowed to open a bank account, when in fact we should be saying that more people should open the bank account. And why is this important? Because as I said, that FBR cannot collect a tax if the transaction is not through digital channels, if it's not leaving any information trail. So if there are no information trails associated with economic transactions, FBR cannot like do nice audits and they cannot recover taxes. So the third thing is like structural transformation. So as economy develops, so people move away from the subsistence agriculture towards like jobs in industry and services sector. And because jobs in industry and services sector, so they are more likely to be taxpayers. So then tax filing and tax payment also increases. So this is share of agriculture in our GDP. So share is very high, but more importantly, it's like flat. So there is no structural transformation at all. So in fact, here also like we are doing worse than low income countries. So this is share of people employed in agriculture. And of course, everywhere, so this share is declining. but the rate at which this share is declining in Pakistan is less than even for that of low income countries. So no structural transformation, no like very weak judicial institutions, cash is the king. And as a result of all these factors, FBR's enforcement is utterly ineffective. So what we are showing here is, what I'm showing here is, so at this point, FBR, so they conducts the audit, VAT audit of a firm. So they audit a firm and they find large amount of tax evasion. But after the audit, it's not that the firm starts paying more. In fact, they keep paying the same amount, so they were paying before audit. So which means audit has no deterrence effect. So audit, despite detecting large amount of tax evasion, does not deter people from tax evasion. So FBI's enforcement is not effective at all. Okay. So I will conclude with this. So tax evasion happens because costs of tax evasion in the economy are low relative to benefits. So the costs of tax evasion, so they can be broken down. It's a tale of three probabilities. So one is the probability that the return you file will be selected by the FBR for audit. Second is the probability that once your return is selected for audit, FBR will detect the evasion committed by you. So this is the detection probability. And then is the probability that once FBR finds that you have evaded so much amount of money, so they will be able to recover that money from you. Okay. So overall, this probability is extremely low in Pakistan. What we find is that this probability is decent. So FBR does a decent job of like auditing the required number of taxpayers. So they also detect large amounts of money as tax evasion, but they cannot recover the amounts that they detect. As a result, so these costs are low. There is no deterrence. Audit creates no deterrent. So why FBR cannot recover the amounts which they detect as tax evasion? So there could be two reasons. So one is that quality of our judicial institutions is so low that even when their detections are good, so they cannot enforce it through the tax system, through the judicial system. And the second reason could be that the quality of their detection is so low that they cannot be enforced through an independent judicial review. So that is like this story. So the quality of their detection is so low because there is no smoking gun. There is no smoking gun because all transactions are in cash. And as a result, the quality of detection is so low that these detections cannot be defended in independent scrutiny. So as a result of that, evasion costs in the country are low. I have found in one of my research that even when the tax rate was 0.5%, 0.5%, so people were evading 70% of their income. So it means that cost of evasion in Pakistan are even lower than 0.5% of reported amount. So this is like incredibly low. So then we should not be surprised that people are like engaging in tax evasion. So we have like lot of reforms in FBR and lot of efforts to reform FBR. So these like the structural issue with these reforms is they always frame this question of low payment as a technological problem. So this is framed as only if we invest in the right technology, so we will be able to eliminate all tax evasion. So technology is fine, but technology, we must remember, is just a complement in this process. Technology is not going to be a substitute for the enforcement effort by the FPR. Another way of saying this is unless these things improve, technology is not going to help tax help you collect more tax. Okay. So so we have to make a simultaneous progress on all fronts to have consistent and gradual increase in our tax revenue, which are one of the lowest in the world, even in Africa. So people have like decent tax to GDP ratio. So Nepal is like our neighbor. So I was working on Nepal. So their tax to GDP ratio is in 20s. So we are like stuck at between 9 and 10 from like 1995 onwards. Okay, I stop here, and then I look forward to like your questions on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mazhar. It's a very informative information regarding Pakistan tax system. You said in UK, if anybody invests the 4,000 pounds, government gives the incentive of 25%. Whereas in Pakistan, we get on the tax on dividend of mutual funds. One thing is, a deduction of tax in the mutual funds, regardless of the pensioners, widows, or others overseas money, they deduct immediately deduct the dividend 25% like that, 15%, 35%, filer and fall. This is the very confusing for me particularly. No incentive for pensioners, no incentive for overseas, no incentive for widows like that. Where we need to consider one question. Second thing is, we government not get the money on the tax. They have indirect taxes, lot of indirect taxes. I think 38 numbers of taxes, indirect taxes, properties everywhere, sale tax. So my second question for you is, UK indirect taxes rate and Pakistan indirect taxes, is it similar, a little bit higher? This is what to make comparison. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed Awais. I'm serving Deputy Commissioner at FBR, and I'm a LUMS alumni. So going through this presentation, I must appreciate the excellent work and the research that has gone into this study. I've been discussing, we at the official level have been discussing this. I mean, like all this effort to enforce a tax return and then try to take some tax out from them, it takes away innumerable man hours from our organization. And we are struggling with junk data, the organization. FBR has been constantly underfunded for the last so many decades. I mean, like the amount of money being spent on the tax collection is one of the lowest in the world. If you look at the numbers, we are probably less than 0.8% of the total tax that we collect, while in other countries, the figures are 2 to 3%. So we feel that the state just is not serious about improving our condition and investing in the right amount of the technologies and the manpower, because our enforcement is so weak. As you explained in your presentation, that the informal sector is increasing every year in Pakistan. So I mean, like there are some very good people out there who are trying to make a difference, and just explaining, just brushing aside all of FBR as a corrupt or not integral organization is just unfair. But I mean, like there are good people out there who want to make a difference, but of course the problem is very bigger. Like, I mean, it's just not linked to the FBR. The problem is way bigger. It's the way we do our business. It's the way we do our politics and our economy. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Should I speak or are you? Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. This was very enlightening. मुझे लगता है वो फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर साहब को पता लग गया था कि आपने प्रेजेंटेशन करनी है, तो उन्होंने वो आए ही नहीं वो So the three-part comment, and my name is Imran Zia, and I'm making this comment as a individual citizen of this country. So I won't disclose, where I work, because this is my experience from my previous work, where I was actually an entrepreneur and actually started a company which was trying to, do some innovative work. Three things that I learned from that. You said that, if you become formal, evidence is that, you grow faster. I would counter argue that there are huge compliance costs in Pakistan. For example, the company that I started was sales tax registered. And in Pakistan, I'm an entrepreneur. 1 month I'll have a sale. 3 months I won't have a sale. 5th month I'll have a sale. But guess what? Every single month I have to file a zero null return. Right? So that's first. Now I'll relate you a small incident. So I had a chartered accountant, and I totally agree. The whole job there is, how to avoid taxes and, commissioner ke saath pesh hona. That's all they do for you. So 1 month I received the tax bill, and, it was higher than usual. So I said, I'd given him a lot of latitude in terms of, what he could do. I said, what is this extra 25,000 rupees? And you know what the response was? Remember 2 months back, we did not file a null return. So now to file a null return, we actually have to pay 25,000 bribe to the tax machinery. So मैंने आपको bill कर दिया. ठीक है? So that's second. My third part is, which I find very interesting, is that I didn't see, you addressing this is, the high tax rate. I mean, 16, 17, 18% sales tax. I don't know where that magical number came from. I mean, if you are in a country which is not tax compliant, you would probably want to keep the rate low to get people into the net. 18% causes a lot of collusion. It also causes a lot of incentive for people to cheat and hide. If it's 3-4%, I'll just want to be compliant and say, look, here's your, government, here's your 3-4%, take it, But 18% causes a lot of issues in terms of, and also it makes some people who want to be, what I learned was some people who want to be compliant, they makes them non-competitive, because somebody else who's your competitor is engaged in saving 18%, and some industries work at 8 or 9% net margin, let alone, I mean, other person getting an 18% benefit by being a cheater. So those are my comments. Thank you.
So thank you so much. So first question is like distinction between like direct and indirect tax. And I'm like completely sympathetic to your position. So savings in most countries, so effectively, so they are not taxed. So tax is usually 0%. Long-term savings, for example, savings towards pension or like saving towards like for later life, so they are subsidized. So we should do that. We should not tax savings. We need more saving and investment and not less. So the second thing is distinction between direct and indirect taxes. So this used to be like 1970s. So when people used to distinguish between them, now no more. So if you write the budget constraint of a household, so then direct and indirect taxes, so they appear in the same way. So they are equivalent. So in the entire world, so now there is move towards like more indirect taxes, more VAT. So in the UK, so you asked, VAT rate is 20%, even higher than what here is. And the reason is, so people think that if you collect your taxes efficiently, so you can redistribute through like public spending. So this is called pre-distribution. So now there is move from redistribution to pre-distribution, that you should equalize like opportunity rather than try to equalize after tax incomes. So this is a long debate, but indirect tax rate is not high in Pakistan. So then our deputy collector Saab, so thank you so much. So one thing I did not mention in my like presentation, so there is like great value in maintaining a clean tax register. So all these junk filers, so they're contaminating our tax register, and that's bad. So tax officials, so they have to like, they are inundated by these utterly pointless tasks of like separating these junk filers from real filers. So FBR has limited enforcement resources and they have to target those limited enforcement resources towards area where they can get the maximum return. And sorting through like these junk filers is not a good way to utilize your limited scarce resource. So then the final question was on compliance cost. So compliance cost used to be very big area in the 1980s, 1990s in development economics. Dr. Nabi will like bear me out. So there was a book by DeSoto, and there was like this is like the entry costs, the compliance costs, like a massive constraint to development, massive constraint to formalization in like developing economies. So then somehow the compliance cost dropped out of radar of public finance and development economists. And this is unfortunate. And the reason is people think now there is like digital technology, so people can just file their tax return. So there is no compliance cost. So we can do anything what we want. So Tax Foundation estimates that it costs around $500 billion in the United States to file taxes. $500 billion. So compliance costs are not trivial, so they are very, very important. But in our policy making, so we are doing all this because we totally ignore compliance costs. We think the taxpayer is not important. We can overburden them as much as they want. And this is not unique to Pakistan. I was working in Cameroon. So their corporate income tax return is 50 pages long. So can you imagine 50 pages long tax return to be filed in Cameroon for like corporate entity? So these should be back. So the evidence that if you formalize a firm, so they grow at a faster rate. So there is some evidence, but it is weak. So if you say there are like massive compliance costs, so then it could be that in Pakistan this does not work. So 18%. So you said if the tax rate is 3-4%, so then you will pay your taxes fairly. But I told you earlier that even when the tax rate was 0.5%, so people were underreporting their income by 70%. So at any tax rate, there will be tax evasion. And there will be tax evasion as long as the cost of evasion is less than the benefit. So lowering the tax rate lowers the benefit of tax evasion, but as long as the costs are less than that, so there will be tax evasion. I'm not sympathetic to reducing the tax rate. So what my prescription is, we should increase the costs of tax evasion in this economy. So one like legitimate concern you have is that in a competitive economy, if a business owner, if they commit tax evasion, so they're not the beneficiary. So they pass on the tax evasion to consumers. So then in a competitive sector, so it's like you are not benefiting, but you are also evading. So then it's like a coordination problem. You have to coordinate so that everyone stops evading, not one or two people.
Thank you. Thank you, Waseem. I put this question to you because you, more than most other researchers, is capable of actually tackling the issue, because you know the FBR, you worked at the FBR, and now you're in the research community and you've done some excellent research. You see, revenue generation has been at the heart of Pakistan's economic problem, whether it is to provide services or it is to avoid macroeconomic crises. So FBR remains a center of discussion. And FBR has received innumerable technical assistance from all kinds of international organizations and bilaterals to improve technology, to improve training, to improve systems. And yet that revenue curve remains flat. I don't think the villain is the FBR. I think what we need to understand is the political economy, the decision-making framework, because whether it's an army government or it is a PPP or it is PMLN or it is PTI, they have all failed in getting appropriate revenues out of our collection system. The question is, what is the political economy that makes FBR so non-compliant in the ultimate objective of revenue generation?
Thanks, Mazhar. Just a couple of quick questions. One was that, bureaucracies are very prone towards metrics. And the metric here seems to be how many, what's the number of filers you can increase? What if the FBR started to track yields from non-filers? Because in some sense, the change that you're wishing is not going to come about because the policy interface process is pretty broken. But if, as researchers, we could start to track metrics showing that the effectiveness is not working using just very basic data, that might start to shift the conversation. The second thing, because I was with some other alums, Professor Anjum is here, we were involved in the famous or infamous Shahid Hussain tax administration reform report. And at that point, there was a lot of discussion about using sales tax data for the purposes of, the combined data for the purposes of enforcement. And now added to that, of course, you have a lot of other data. While I agree that financial inclusion has not happened, but if you look at transactional data of a whole variety, whether it's property transactions, it's travel transactions, a lot of that actually tends to get documented because of the CNIC getting linked, cellular data. So there's a lot of data that's actually available, which should reduce the cost of targeted enforcement. So within the FBR, what is the block of moving from, this kind of universal enforcement to targeted enforcement?
This is a similar question related to what Ali just asked. So, what's the prospect of taxing assets? Because that's one of the more visible forms of expenditure, and this is one which cannot be evaded because it has to be registered. And I would think that this is a bulk form of durable consumption, and most consumption, cash consumption, which may be invisible, but this is one form which is not invisible, and their most durable consumption would be one which could be tracked and therefore taxed. So the two issues: whether this is a possibility, and whether this is kind of double taxation, because you've taxed income once, and once income has been taxed and it's been then used for building assets, then you may be taxing people twice. But there are lots those who don't pay a tax and then build assets. So taxing those people would then be justified.
Yeah.
Sir, I just wanted to ask about political economy. Once I had a conversation with S. Akbar Zaidi, director IBA, and I asked him, sir, why don't we have entrepreneurs in our country? India has a lot of entrepreneurs. Why don't we? He replied in a single line and said, we don't allow people to take risks. Basically, sir, in the so-called agriculture revolution and golden decade, 90% the credit from banking system of Pakistan went towards large farm owners. Why our banking system, does not support small owners, entrepreneurs, and risk takers?
I'm Shahriyar Mehdi. I'm an entrepreneur. My question is, while mentioning the reasons behind low tax collection by the FBR, you mentioned a few factors. All are very important. But you didn't mention about the trust issues. People in Pakistan don't trust the tax institutions because they believe government doesn't spend on people, rather they spend on themselves. That's it. How the government is going to tackle this issue or rebuild its image. That's all.
So thank you very much. So Ijaz Saab's question, FBR is not the villain, 100% agree. So one of like the follies of this reform is that these reforms are focused only on FBR. So as FBR exists in isolation, so tax collection, as I said, depends on like so many other things which happen in the economy. If you start, so if you start with like improving access to like formal banking, so more digital transactions, so you will like incentivize that. You will invest in like education, especially in the rural sector, to like accelerate structural transformation. So you will like invest in the quality of your judicial institutions, but everything is focused on FBR, as this is where all the like revenue collection is going to come from. But this is political economy is angle is like very important. Tim Besley has like wrote a lot of like done good work explaining why like the tax collection in developing countries remains weak, why elites being incumbents do not invest enough in like enforcement capacity of the state, in tax capacity of the state. So I am not an expert, so I will not venture an opinion, but there is like a lot of work done in this. So Ali said that metrics. So I 100% agree. So the metric has to shift. So they give FBR targets. So those targets are in terms of nominal rupees. So you cannot do worse than this in terms of like setting your targets. So in a country where inflation is 30%, in you set your targets in rupees, so every year, so you read in newspaper that revenue this year is 30% higher than the last year, is 40% higher. This is just money, illusion of money. So the revenue is not increasing, it's just the inflation and the GDP growth. So they should set target in terms of like tax to GDP ratio, in terms of as a share of GDP. That's the only way. And this is like a so number of filers, so that's an attractive metric because it's binary. It's binary, so you have so many, someone is a filer or not filer. So you exact this and then you inflate those numbers, and it's quite easy to inflate those numbers. And then bureaucracy is happy, government is happy, so they can claim some political like mileage out of this, that they're expanding the tax base, but there is no real improvement. So then you also said like Shahid Hussain report. So there is a lot of transactional data has been like, I can vouch for that. I have seen FBR sitting on, so data is like the new oil. So it's like the wealth. So data is the currency on which like a revenue authority operates. And FBR has like a lot of very quality data. They know a lot of things about you. I think they know more about you than you do. But problem is like ultimately someone has to process that data and do the audit. And there the problem is that they have not one thing. So all these reforms, so they have tinkered on the margins, which are really do not relevant. So they have what they have not fixed is the incentives of bureaucrats. So FBR, so they have like some very smart people, but as an organization, it's an inefficient organization because people there do not have incentives to work hard and work honestly. And they cannot do this. So this is a principal agent problem, classical, because government cannot credibly commit that if they work hard and if they provide honest effort, they will be rewarded. So they are a classical civil service, so they are on long-term contracts, so they cannot be hired, so they have jobs for life. So their performance usually is not measured. So even when it is measured, so their like promotions, their transfers, everything is not linked to their performance. And so unless you fix these incentives, you won't get effort from the FBR. Another thing, so if because of all these reforms, you make FBR more productive, so then without fixing those incentives, so the FBR will also be more productive in extracting bribes. So you see, you will be like increasing the productivity of that as well. So unless you fix the incentives, you are not going to get results. Anjum Saab said like taxing assets, so it's a kind of wealth tax. So they're trying very hard. I think 7E. So it's again a very controversial area. So wealth tax is like difficult. So one thing is, so you are trying to tax an illiquid asset. So sometimes people have assets but do not have income. So then there is a difficulty in payment of tax. So a lot of people, they might be like living in the good houses because of this legacy, so because of inheritance, but they don't have income. So then wealth is very difficult to measure relative to income. So that's another problem. So third thing is you can avoid wealth taxes more easily than income taxes. That's the third reason. I'm like very much in favor of like reforming our property tax, and there have been efforts to do that. So we can get more from property, we can get more from assets, definitely, but it's not like this would be like very easy. It won't be easy. So it will have like its own set of problems. So
if you say that you are inefficient, corrupted like that, but I would like to say FPR is very efficient, very capable, very effective for salary persons. They did that.
yeah, because they cannot like hide their income. So there was another question which was on like the trust issue, so the trust in government. So of course, if there is reciprocity, if like there is like this civil contract, if people see that their taxes are being spent on their welfare, so the people will have like higher willingness to pay. But overall evidence is that this effect is quite weak. So ultimately, everyone is happy to evade taxes as long as the cost is lower than the benefits.
Stop here. We can continue over the, but please join in.